This week on the Communicators, a discussion about Julius Genachowski, President Obama's choice to lead the Federal Communications Commission. This week, the Senate Commerce Committee held a confirmation hearing in which he addressed the expansion of broadband in the U.S., media ownership rules, and the so-called Fairness Doctrine.
Well, the Senate Commerce Committee this week held nomination hearings on Julius Genachowski to be the new FCC chief. And joining us to talk about that this week on the Communicators, Andrew Feinberg of broadbandcensus.org and Fawn Johnson of Dow Jones Newswire. Mr. Feinberg, before we review the hearing itself, give us a little background on Julius Genachowski.
Well, the guy's been everywhere. He's been at the FCC, he's been in the private sector on both the entertainment side with Barry Diller at IAC, he's been a venture capitalist, actually right here in Washington with Launchbox Digital, which is a DC-based startup incubator, and he's sort of been a tech consigliere to the Obama campaign all the way through. He's on his technology advisory committee, and now he's probably going to be our next FCC chairman, barring anything horrible or strange.
Fawn Johnson, given his background, what do we know about him now, and where do you think he'll take the FCC?
Well, we know he's passionate about the internet, and this comes from the Obama presidential campaign. He was one of the early supporters of Obama. He was actually one of the first to bring the telecom community around him and supporting him. He brought people in who have never actually given money to a presidential candidate before. So we know that just from his experience on the Obama campaign that he is going to be very, very clearly, his first goal is to blanket the country with internet access, which squares very well with Barack Obama. That's what he wants to do as well. And it also squares nicely with Congress because they put that into the economic stimulus bill. We also know that he is, having spent time in the private sector, is sensitive to their needs and their concerns about being overregulated. But he's a Democrat, he's progressive. They are going to see some scrutiny, probably not like they've had in the previous administration.
Several of the articles coming out of the hearing described him as pro-consumer. What does that mean?
Well, I'm not sure that there was anything in the hearing besides his own words that indicated he was pro-consumer. He's really, there's so much talk about this guy, and I say it in the nicest possible way, but we really know nothing about him other than his resume. And whether or not he's pro-consumer, all we really know is he'd like to make the FCC website better. That's really the only thing that we know. So whether or not he's pro-consumer, I think that really we'll see after he's confirmed.
And let's keep in mind that everybody is pro-consumer in this business. All of the big telco companies will use consumers as their excuse for almost anything. So in a way, it's a word that we're not quite sure what it means yet. We'll find out.
Well, in the hearing this week, one of the issues that all of the senators who questioned him talked about was the national broadband strategy and the dollars that are going towards that. Here's what Julius Genachowski had to say about it.
The growing consensus that we need a national broadband strategy in this country. In fact, the requirement that the FCC develop and issue a national broadband plan is a recognition that we as a country are not where we need to be with respect to our communications infrastructure. We should have, I believe, a communications infrastructure that is world-leading, a 21st century infrastructure that generates economic growth, opportunity, prosperity, and critically, we should have in this country a 21st century communications infrastructure that extends to all Americans and that does so, to your point, meaningfully, in a way that they can afford to sign up and use and take advantage of the opportunities that communications technology offers.
I think that that's a perfect example of that lays out what Julius Genachowski wants to do as FCC chairman. He, like he has said, and Barack Obama has said, wants to make sure that everybody has access to high-speed internet, and however that's possible. The question is going to be how to do that, and the FCC has already begun a series of questions about how to actually bring these connections to people in very hard-to-reach areas. I didn't hear in that answer, I didn't hear at the hearing any specifics about how we're going to pay for it and whether or not the government will have to pay for some people to be connected who simply can't be connected any other way. So we'll have to see how he handles that one.
Well, it's interesting to note that that question, that answer he gave wasn't actually an answer to a question about broadband. It was a question about whether or not the FCC was, I believe the words were, structurally capable of reform. And it was a wonderful speech about broadband and illustrates the president's priorities and what I think will be his priorities at the commission. And broadband is a good thing, but I just think it's worth noting that that wasn't the question that he was answering.
Well, another question that was asked by the Senate Commerce Chair, Senator Rockefeller, was about the FCC being more open to the public.
Question, do you agree that the FCC should be more open to the public?
Yes.
And how?
Well, Senator, the first thing is it requires a commitment throughout the agency to principles of openness, transparency, fairness, fact-based decision-making, and if confirmed, I would want to lead the FCC in that direction. I don't see how it could be otherwise. The issues are just too complex. We need an FCC that's smart about technology, smart about the law, smart about economics, smart about businesses, and smart about what consumers go through every day in navigating a complex communications world. So I think this is quite important. I had the same experience that you did in trying to navigate the FCC website. The FCC should be a model for transparency, openness, and fairness. There's a lot of work to do, but I'd like to see the FCC be a model with respect to using communications technologies to communicate openly with the American people and with all the constituencies that are interested in what the Commission does.
And along that same line, Senator Dorgan had a statement he made.
Let me say, however, that it seems to me you will lead a rather unhealthy agency. And by that, I mean we've been through a period of substantial secrecy. I believe very difficult work environment, questions about unbiased policy research studies. Some of them perhaps don't match someone's impression of what should have come out of the studies, so they weren't released. A lot of very important, serious questions were raised about the stewardship of the FCC. And so I'm pleased that we have an opportunity now for a new direction. Mr. Copps, Commissioner Copps has, I think, done a fine job in an acting capacity. But, you know, we need more transparency, more openness in policy development.
Andrew Feinberg.
Well, transparency, great. Openness, great. These are all buzzwords of the Obama administration, and I'll believe it when I see it. Again, new website, that will be wonderful. I think it's worth noting that the administration has talked a lot about open government and transparency and made it sort of their mantle and taken this on. They had an open government directive, but it's really been limited to a small number of groups and solutions. It's really been a lot of the Sunlight Foundation. They do great work, and people like that, and a very limited notion of what open government means. It's more technology-centered than people-centered, and I think there's a sense that anything could be better than the FCC under former Chairman Martin, but how much better, again, we don't know. We're going to have to see what happens.
It's worth noting also that the former FCC Chairman, Kevin Martin, had made some efforts in this area as well. It's true that his administration was considered very secretive, and he was very good at conducting last-minute deals, but he also put all of the orders that were circulating around the FCC up on the website. It wasn't always easy to find, but I did it after a little while, and he would hold press conferences when it was time for to announce the meeting's agenda, which is the purview of the chairman. You know, there are parts of the FCC which institutionally are difficult to make public, especially when they're trying to put together a difficult rule. Remember, there's 5 commissioners, they're all independent, they all get to weigh in. So I think we can believe Mr. Genachowski at his heart. This is really what he wants to do. I agree with Andrew, though. I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to see it in the rulemaking process.
Well, you're two professionals who follow these issues. Do you have trouble with the FCC website?
I don't have any trouble with the FCC website, but when I first started covering it, it took a little while, especially to find some of the filings that people would be putting through. But I think it definitely could become more user-friendly, for sure.
I think 1998 called it once its website back. The information's all there, but the interface could be better. And Chairman-designate Genachowski talked a lot about, I think he said Web 2.0 at one point, and another, cross off in your buzzword bingo chart. But that would be an improvement. It would help if there were some more modern tools built in. But the site has the information you need if you know how to find it.
Yeah, I think no matter how good the site is, if it doesn't have the information that we're looking for, we're still going to be calling up all of the staff and asking them to tell us.
Well, the ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, Kay Bailey Hutchison, had played quite an active role in this hearing too. And one of the questions that she asked about was the media ownership issue.
When I first came to the Senate, I was a person who believed that a newspaper should not have too much television presence in a market because I think more media outlets are a good thing. Since I came to the Senate, the technology world has exploded, and I no longer think that we need to police that, and now we have the most incredible situation, which I don't think any of us ever anticipated in our lifetimes, that major newspapers would be on the brink of literally going out of business and not having that avenue for news coverage for the citizens of big communities is now a viable possibility. So my question is, the FCC does still have rules against dual ownership, and I think it is important that you look at that and determine if really we ought to be doing everything we can to keep newspapers alive in order to have the most outlets for people who like to get their news in different ways.
Senator, very, very early in my career, I worked on a newspaper in college, and then I reestablished the oldest newspaper at the college that I went to. My heart is filled with respect for the role that newspapers play in our society and our democracy. And a little bit later in my career, I spent time in the broadcasting industry, where I learned both that it's a special business, plays a special role in our country, and also that it's a hard business, especially in these times. It's a unique business. It's still our broadcasting, our only universal medium and source for news and information. And so excessive consolidation is something I think that still needs to be paid attention to. But at the same time, it wouldn't be right for the FCC to ignore the changes in the marketplace that are apparent, and the struggles in the various parts of the traditional media business.
Fawn Johnson.
That was a classic example of maneuvering very deftly around a really controversial and difficult question. Senator Hutchison was asking Genachowski whether or not in these difficult times we might be able to allow some more consolidation of the media to save, frankly, some of our jobs. And if you can tell, he very charmingly talked about his experience in the media and did one of these on the one hand to the other. We need to pay attention to media consolidation, but we have to be careful about the marketplace. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that coming from him, trying to balance the needs of the advocates, some of whom have supported him greatly, and the businesses who say, look, we just can't handle more regulation.
I think he's a very good dancer. Newspapers, the news business is good. I don't know if business is good, but the business is good. But at least Fawn and I can agree on that. I think that the issue that Senator Hutchinson was raising speaks more to Republican fears or worries about overreaching, sweeping regulations that are going to be almost the anti-Martin administration. And it's noteworthy, though, she was only one of two Republicans who actually came to the hearing. The other was, I believe, Mike Johanns from...
Senator Thune from South Dakota was there also briefly at the end. So, but yeah, there was not a whole lot of Republicans there.
Yeah, but I wanted to go back to the media ownership before we move on to that. She was very clear about her position on this issue, wasn't she?
I think so. It was a statement in the form of a question, and I think he responded to it very deftly and didn't raise any hackles with it.
And speaking of senators attending, it did not seem that the full committee was there to attend this hearing.
I would say maybe half of the members were there for some of the time. In fact, I don't know if you have this on your clips, but Senator Rockefeller actually got a little angry about senators showing up and then asking their questions and leaving. To be fair, this hearing has been a long time in the making. There's a lot going on in the Senate, but still, it was not particularly well attended by it was well attended by the media and by the lobbyists, but not so much
Why?
The members. You know, it's the problems surrounding the delay for Julius Genachowski's confirmation have not had anything to do with him. Everyone likes him. I think, you know, any problems that anyone would have, we don't know about yet. It's been about the rest of the FCC going forward and what it'll look like. And once the Republicans finally settled on their members, and there was another nominee who also had his confirmation hearing, Robert McDowell, at the same time. Once they settled on those guys, it was almost like the dispute was over, and now we're just sort of seeing it through. So I think that was part of it.
Is Robert McDowell's re-nomination controversial in any way?
I don't think so. I think that he's almost a perfect pick for Obama. He's very much his own man. He's a Republican, but he's gone against the grain. The first thing he did on the commission was recuse himself. That didn't make some people very happy on some sides of the issue, but he said he's going to be an independent commissioner and an independent agency, and I think that's the kind of Republican the president wants.
Well, he'll do a good job of keeping Genachowski honest and other Democrats in terms of the statute, because he's very careful about that. It's a little unclear how much the industry supports him. One major carrier raised a few problems about him when they were vetting it through the Republicans. So we'll see how that works out. That was AT&T, by the way.
Why did they have problems with his renomination?
It's not entirely clear. It was AT&T's merger with Bell South that McDowell recused himself from, even after he was asked by then Chairman Kevin Martin to please vote that it's okay. That caused some problems for AT&T. They were forced to make some concessions in order to be able to have that merger. But there's other decisions that he's made along the lines that I don't think they've been too happy with. As I said, he looks to the statute first, and so he might not necessarily look to what an individual carrier might want in any particular context.
He's not a party man.
Right, that's right.
Has another Republican, Andrew Feinberg, been nominated yet, or more than past the discussion stage?
I don't believe so.
The word on the street is that Meredith Atwell Baker, who is the former head of NTIA at the Commerce Department under President Bush, she's not been formally named by the president. That, as I understand it, and these plans can shift around, that the idea is to have her nomination go forward with Mignon Clyburn, who is the Democrat from South Carolina, who is the other nominee.
And the daughter of James Clyburn,
exactly.
The majority whip.
Right. So that's the plan.
Well, Senator Cantwell was at the hearing, and she talked about she talked about net neutrality. And this was Mr. Genachowski's answer.
If there is a competitive market for broadband services where consumers could purchase broadband from multiple independent providers, would the discussion over net neutrality change?
Well, I think that in a market of unlimited competition, it might change. The goal, as I see it, of the net neutrality debate is to preserve the internet as the greatest platform for innovation and small business creation that we've ever had. More competition, more consumer choice would, of course, help achieve that, and that would be an excellent thing.
But obviously not, I mean, the concern obviously is not to artificially segment off parts of the population and giving them a higher cost. So you see more competition in broadband services.
Competition is clearly a goal for the FCC, the Communications Act, and something that I'd hope to pursue and promote at the FCC.
Andrew Feinberg of broadbandcensus.com. What did you hear in that answer?
I heard him say competition a lot of times. Again, playing the bingo card did very well on that. I think that he, again, tap danced very nicely between what his position and the administration's position clearly is, which is one towards transparency and I'll say it, network neutrality, no matter what you want to call it, and the other side, which is afraid of sweeping over-regulation and anti-business practices. So I think that he answered it in the only way he could without jeopardizing his confirmation.
Was it significant, Fawn Johnson, that Senator Cantwell from Washington State asked that question?
Oh, you mean that she represents the state where Microsoft is located? I think so. Yeah, I clearly, Microsoft is one of the companies that's worried about, I would say, excessive overregulation in this area. I don't think that they're going to object to the current status that the FCC is doing now. They've got some principles that they're looking at. They cited Comcast last year, but yeah, this is one of the examples of the senator asking a question on behalf of an industry that employs a lot of people in her state. And I agree with Andrew. This was a very deft response. I noted that he turned a question about network neutrality and openness into a question about competition. And he didn't actually use the term openness, which is a buzzword of the Obama campaign. So very, very nicely done.
Senator Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, was also there. She talked about interoperability with Julius Genachowski.
I'm the co-chair of the 9/1 caucus. I'm a former prosecutor. I did that for 8 years and saw firsthand some of these interoperability issues. The good, when we had our bridge collapse, and our area right in the metropolitan area had done a very good job of interoperability because of our sheriff and others. And then I've seen difficulties in the past and in some of our rural areas with that. And it seems to me that's just one of the areas of our nation's information infrastructure that may continue to elude us absent some federal action and federal involvement in terms of making our emergency services more interable.
Senator,
is it interable, Mr. Janik? That's a trick question. Interoperable. Do you think that's something you would be willing to work on?
Very much so. My wife and I were not very far from the World Trade Center on 9/11. Most of my family was in either New York or Washington. None of us should be satisfied with where we are on public safety. Chairman Rockefeller, who stepped out, others on this committee have been leaders on this. As one of your colleagues mentioned earlier, the 9/11 Commission urged the country to do something about public safety interoperability, and we have to do it. It's just not acceptable that firefighters and police officers arrive at the scene of an emergency and can't communicate with each other. And we have a new opportunity now that we need to seize, I think, as quickly as possible around mobile broadband. Now that we're through the digital television transition, there's spectrum available for advanced mobile public safety applications for our first responders. I don't think we can move too quickly in tackling that, and it's something that I look forward to working with you on. It's very important.
Thank you.
Fawn Johnson of Dow Jones.
That was a very succinct way of describing the problem. And the previous FCC has tried to address that problem by getting private sector companies to come in and partner with the firefighters and the police officers to form an interoperable network, and it didn't work. I actually think that this is something that Congress is going to have to look at. The current FCC,
and mandate?
And mandate, yes. The current FCC under Acting Chairman Michael Copps has already put on the table the idea of just giving this valuable block of TV airways away to the public safety groups because, quite frankly, nobody in the private sector wants it if they have to partner with somebody else. So I think, but the problem is Congress has to mandate that. The FCC chairman can't do it. So he did a fine job of talking about the problem, but he really can't answer it, I think, at this point. I will note, though, that his segueing into the wireless broadband was interesting, because the wireless industry has, since I've been covering the FCC, been worried that they get left behind sometimes in these conversations about broadband. And the fact that he mentioned wireless and talked about its potential should make them very happy. There are numerous ways that we can use broadband in a wireless context throughout the country. And so I'm hoping that, as I'm watching the FCC, that this might be something that Genachowski would try and merge the people who deal with the traditional landline connections and the other people, which are different, who deal with the wireless connections, and help them kind of work together. So that was interesting.
I think that it was interesting that he didn't mention specifically the failed D-Block auction. He did in passing, but he didn't go into a lot of detail. But I think that something that got totally left out was the issue of spectrum reform. And Senator Kerry has a bill to do a spectrum map, an inventory, I believe. I forget who he's co-sponsored with.
Senator Snowe, I think.
Yeah, Kerry Snowe, you're right. And I think that something the FCC can deal with is reforming how we allocate spectrum. There's a great debate always going on about whether there's a scarcity in spectrum or permission to use the spectrum. And this huge swath that's just now sitting there, yeah, they could give it to public safety, or they could give it to everyone, or they could give it to both. And we could have a real change in our spectrum policy that we haven't had in many, many years, but we'll see.
Well, we're almost out of time, but we wanted to show one more clip and get your response to it. Senator Pryor talking about broadband.
I would like to ask you about the BTOP, the Broadband Technology and Opportunity program in the stimulus package. Do you know much about that, and do you have a sense of how that's going to be administered?
My understanding is that it's the Commerce Department and the Agriculture Department that have the grant making authority. The FCC, as I understand it, has responsibilities to consult with those agencies as they put together the plans for distributing the grants.
And I know you're not there yet, but is your understanding that the FCC is involved in that process?
My understanding is that there's been consultation, yes.
And are you happy with what you hear on that, or do you think the FCC should be more involved, and do you think that program is going to actually get to unserved areas, as Senator Hutchison was referring to?
Senator, I don't have any access to non-public information. From what I've heard publicly, I believe that active, healthy consultation processes are going forward. I think these kinds of activities are ways to demonstrate how government can work together collaboratively to pursue a common end. The FCC is the expert agency around communications and our communications infrastructure. It's more than appropriate that the FCC play a consultative role, and it's certainly something that I would want to jump into if confirmed and work with you to understand ideas that you might have on the grant program.
I thought that he gave the correct answer. Not only is it absolutely appropriate that the FCC play a consultative role, it's in the statute. And for a minute I was wondering if Senator Pryor had forgotten or maybe skipped that part of the legislation when he was reading through it, because the FCC has no grant-making authority in the BTOP program. All they're doing is defining served and unserved and creating this national broadband plan, also helping with the map. But all the money is in agriculture and at NTIA.
And Fawn Johnson, you mentioned earlier that the room was full of lobbyists. Lots of lobbyists?
Lots of lobbyists.
From
all
aspects
over.
of the industry?
Yeah. I mean, the thing to remember here is that this is the guy that's going to be dictating their future for the next 4, 5, 6, 8 years maybe. Who knows? So it's very important to the industry to have representatives in the room. And you know, when I showed up at the hearing, the line was snaking down two flights of stairs with various people from the major companies and then the major lobbying firms who represent them. it makes sense. These people who are confirmed to be commissioners of the FCC have a lot of power over the industry. The regulations are very complicated. Congress doesn't want to get involved in it. And so they need to develop a good relationship with Julius Genachowski, and this is how they show that they care.
Well, our guests for the last half hour have been Fawn Johnson with Dow Jones Newswires and Andrew Feinberg of broadbandcensus.com. We've been discussing the nomination of Julius Genachowski to be the next chair of the FCC. When will the vote happen? Ooh, if it hasn't already?
It could happen before the July 4th recess. There are things that could stall that. Obviously, it only takes one senator, but that has been the plan, at least as the part of the committee. We'll have to wait and see. We expected other nominees to go forward a lot more quickly, and then they've gotten held up for other reasons. So we're still waiting on that one.
And you can watch the full hearing if you'd like at cspan.org. Thank you both for being on the Communicators.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tomorrow.